I think that safeties are growing in importance with the way that the NFL is trending because of all that they bring.
Safeties, 2022 NFL Draft. Of course, the conversation starts with Kyle Hamilton, who has been perceived as a top prospect. But a lot of the Kyle Hamilton discussion has turned away from the player that Kyle Hamilton is or is not, and is instead focused on positional value. And this is a debate that we have seen throughout the course of the past several seasons with high-caliber safety prospects, including guys who fell out of the first round altogether, who, in retrospect, probably deserve to have their name called amongst the top 32 picks. Think about guys like Antoine Winfield, Xavier McKinney. These were high-level safety prospects who still managed to find their way outside the first round. So instead of talking about a safety class that has a couple of really likable guys at the top, I think the conversation needs to start with positional value for safeties as the players who you often see as the X-factor players to counter a lot of the X-factor tight ends that you're seeing a lot of teams have success with at the NFL level. Where do we stand on that?
I think we've said this a ton, but I think the safeties that have coverage upside gives your defense flexibility to be able to stay in base if the offense goes, 11 personnel. So I think it highlights the safeties that have the coverage upside. They're going to be valued more because the game is played. 70% of it is played in sub. So I think that the way the game is going now, again, guys that can play in space who have some upside in coverage both in the slot and against tight ends, those guys are valuable, invaluable to a defense.
Yeah, even more so like in terms of the value of safeties, and you really want a well-rounded safety that can give you something both against the run and the pass, because if you have that, you don't have to change personnel in terms of what the offense dictates, right? Like if you have a guy like, just Derwin James as an example, his ability in the box is outstanding. He's really your fourth linebacker. You can walk him in and he's making plays. He's triggering against the run. He's blitzing the quarterback. He's outstanding. Or you can push him back, get 12 yards of depth, a split safety, even a single high safety look, and he can do those things too. And so for me, a safety in today's NFL is one of the most important positions you can have on defense because you can ask him to do so much.
I agree, and that's another position that I disagree, right, with it being devalued over time, because when you look at it with corners, right, like usually offenses can scheme to throw away from a corner, but it's hard to scheme to say I'm not going to throw towards that safety
because the safety moves too.
Yeah, and that's the point, right? Like so now I think the defense has a chess piece, right, to where they can put them in certain situations where, man, tendency-wise in this bunch set, I know that this offense usually throws the ball to the number 2 wide receiver. So I'm going to place my safety over here. So they give the defense an opportunity to kind of fight back with these offenses that become so creative over the past couple of years.
We talk about how we can disguise coverage, right? Like being a disguise-based defense. And that comes from the safeties, like you mentioned, spinning late, giving one look pre-snap and then changing the menu post-snap. Yeah. Your safeties are the players that do that for your defense. Right. And so you need guys that can, kind of have that range to be able to get to different landmarks that are not the expected landmarks. And so I think that safeties are growing in importance with the way that the NFL is trending because of all that they bring, to complement what everybody said here, but also that disguise element.
Well, I think what's interesting too is you are starting to see some growth from the league in a spending commitment to the safeties as compared to what the average salary for a starting safety was. That market is growing, right? And it's not just growing at a rate that's proportionate to the growth of the salary cap. They're spending more for quality safeties and what they're able to bring to the table because of all the different ways that they can move. My question is, when is the draft habits of teams going to change to match that? Right?
Yeah.
Because we just gave a bunch of great examples of players who should have probably been first-round selections based off talent, but positional value, he can't go in this range. And I understand the last time a team really swung hard for a safety, it was Jamal Adams, and he doesn't quite have the coverage upside and impact that you would want for a player in that stature.
But who fault was that, right?
Right.
Right.
That was on the
Don't
Jets.
punish the safeties that are coming through now if you're picking in the 20s.
And not only that, but what I'm saying is that was Jamal Adams in college. Like that's who he was. So that's what I'm saying is like that's on the Jets to draft Jamal Adams. He never showed you. I don't say that he couldn't cover, but he was not an elite level defender in pass coverage. Unlike this draft, right? Like we have guys when we talk about a Daxton Hill and a Kyle Hamilton that just show that like true range and the back 20, 30 yards of the defense. So I think you draft those safeties with versatility. Now, if you're talking about versatility, Jamal Adams did show you that. Guess what? He can play that that cover 3 robber type role, and he can get into the box, and he's one of the best blitzing defensive backs I think of all time. Right?
Yeah.
Some of the stats have been all time. So so
There's still value there. It's
that's
just not
his value,
traditional
right?
safety value.
Yeah, so it's just a matter of what did the guy put on film, and that's the key point to this.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think it's important to remember that a safety's primary role is to defend the pass, right? And certainly while he has value, I think the discrepancy in terms of where he was valued and where he was picked is in that his primary role was a little bit different than the things that he was asked to do. And a player like Jamal isn't going to fit everyone's defense though either. Yeah. So,
and not only where he was drafted, what he was traded for too.
Yeah,
I mean, you think about the trade package that the Jets eventually acquired for Jamal Adams. Now, I do think Seattle has done a nice job in carving out coverage-specific things. It's a little bit more limited, and the whole appeal of a lot of safeties is the versatility that they can provide in all phases of the game. So let's bring this conversation back to guys this year. I mean, we have guys like you mentioned Daxton Hill, and we've already mentioned Kyle Hamilton. We also have Jaquan Brisker and Lewis Sine as 2 more safeties who can give you a little bit of everything. It's just they have things that they might be better at relative to one another and relative to other safeties across the league. How many of these guys do you think ultimately get their name called in the first round when it's all said and done?
I think 2 for sure. I think Kyle Hamilton and Daxton Hill are locks. Then I would not be shocked to see a Lewis Sine or a Jaquan Brisker go kind of in the late first. I personally would go with Brisker, but I know Lewis Sine's kind of combine and pre-draft type of stuff in the process have been outstanding. So I think either of those guys could definitely hear their name in the late round of early 1.
2.
Yeah, I think it'll be 2-2, and I think the 2 guys that be left out would be Jaquan Brisker
And Sine.
Yeah, and Sine, just because, I mean, in history, right, how many times have we seen an NFL team trade up for a safety in the back of the first round? It's usually offensive tackles, edge rushers, corners, or quarterbacks. Yeah. So I think it'll kind of stay to that theme as far as what they'll trade up in the back end of the first.
Yeah, I think it's 2. I think it's Hamilton and Hill, but those players are good. I mean, Sine and Brisker, those guys are going to be quality starters in my view. But I think the other thing, like, it's not just not trading back up into the first round. I don't see a whole lot of need for the teams the back part of the first round to draft a safety. So you have 2 things kind of working against it to get more than 2 in my mind.
Well, and the reason why we all think Daxton Hill is a slam dunk lock is because you talk about versatility.
Yeah.
He can play high post, he runs 4.38. He can play. So some people perceive he could play outside corner because he's got a lot of length. You know he's going to be able to play in the nickel. He played there predominantly this past year at Michigan. So he's shown you those multiple spots in which he can make an impact, and he has the athletic profile and the movement skills of somebody who can play even more in coverage. So that plays in the passing game. Daxton Hill's going to check that box. We don't have quite the concerns and utilize him as a total mismatch weapon. So my other question for you guys, because it seems the consensus is 2. Winner Brisker and Sine off the board then?
I think that you can comfortably see those guys off the board in round 2.
How early in round 2? First half of round 2? Because I think from if you stack the players that are going to be left on the board for the start of day 2,
sure,
you'd have a hard time telling me those 2 guys probably aren't going to be amongst the top 10 to 15 most talented players left on the board from a pure skill set perspective at that point.
I think it's hard to gauge because not every defensive coordinator values safeties in in the same manner. So I think it's hard to gauge, but I think that you can definitely see or hear both of their names come off the board in round 2.
I'd be shocked if they weren't off the board in the top
50?
10, 15 picks of the second round.
So by 50, you think they'd be both off the board?
100%, yes.
I think that's the area where we usually see teams go in scramble mode too, though, right? Like after that first round, beginning of the second round,
you get a little run on something that had a run on it, and you start overdrafting
we talked about
a guy.
that, right? We talked about receivers, even as not being a deep offensive tackle class, right? Is that when you start to see the Bernard Raymonds do team panic? And, this is a guy that we don't really care for, but he has traits. Talking about a Darian Kennard, Abraham Lucas. Like, do teams start to move up and they look at their draft board like, hold on, like we need to draft an offensive tackle now, because if not, we won't get a guy that until he has a 4th, 5th round grade on him. So, like I said, I like those two safeties. It's just unfortunate, and that's what we started this conversation with, that the NFL doesn't necessarily value them as much compared to other positions.
Yeah, I think that I would be surprised if they got outside of the top 50. They should go inside the top 50 just based on their skill level, but I think that's a good point, where whether somebody wants to start the running back run, you're trying to scramble for some of the offensive line talent, what receivers are left, and is there a little quarterback run at the top of the second round? There's a lot of contributing factors here that can easily force a couple of really good players in Brisker and Scene outside the top 50.
Well, we'll end this conversation with this. To any NFL teams out there, if you're picking after 50 and either one of those two dudes is on the board, run in the cart.